Distinguished presenter. He's a practicing psychoanalyst and organizational consultant, and is the past president of the International Society for the Psychoanalytic Study of Organizations. He's a former director of the organizational program at the William Allison White Institute, which he helped to found, and he currently teaches, supervises, and serves as a fellow at that institute. For several years, he directed the A.K. Rice Institute's National Conference on Leadership and Authority, and his papers and publications have focused recently on the psychodynamics of psychoanalytic institutions and have been published in such journals as the International Journal of Psychoanalysis, the Journal of the American Psychoanalytic Association, Psychoanalytic Psychology and Contemporary Psychoanalysis, Psychoanalytic Dialogues, Psychoanalytic Inquiry, and the Journal of Analytical Psychology. They have also been on such diverse topics as dreams, literature, and psychoanalysis, theories of group behavior, and authority. He's also published in the Harvard Business Review and provided commentary for the Wall Street Journal. In addition to his doctorate in clinical psychology and his certificate in psychoanalysis, our distinguished presenter holds a doctorate in English and comparative literature from Columbia University. He's been teaching and writing about the unconscious aspects of larger systems for some time, as well as consulting to organizations and coaching organizational leaders. He has a website which is www.keneisold.com that includes some comments on recent events and some articles he's written, and he has recently completed a book which will be coming out in January, which is entitled What You Don't Know, You Know, about how our ideas and the unconscious have been revised and extended. And in addition to all this, I've had the privilege of frequent conversations with him for the past several months and found him to be informative, insightful, and a delightful human being. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ken Eisold, who will speak today on what makes traders trade and how that is changing in the digital age.
Thank you, Bill. This paper, which is actually written, and I'm going to read it, but I'm going to try to read it by not reading it, by referring to it, so to speak, looking at you, and not kind of put it up in front of my face the way most of my colleagues do. But this is about my experience, I would say over the last 10 years, as what you could loosely call a coach. And I put it that way because I think the only difference between the way I work as a coach and the way I work as a psychotherapist is that the focus of coaching is on the work situation of the client. They come to me to be their coach because they're having problems with work, with their relationships at work, or in this particular case, with their ability to trade. Sometimes their interpersonal problems, their marital difficulties, stuff with their kids and that sort of thing will come up. And if it comes up, I don't, by no means do I refuse to talk about it, but it's very clear that they're coming to see me for their help with work, and for me that's the only kind of key difference. I feel it would be a mistake to artificially restrict the kinds of comments I make, the kinds of interpretations I offer, the areas I go into, because from my point of view, it's all part of the same. They're trying to do the best they can with what they've got, and if I know something more about their emotional or unconscious motivations that I've picked up from interacting with them, it feels artificial and false not to take advantage of that. And so far I've never run into anybody who's minded the help that I have to offer in that way. But this paper is specifically about the work with oil traders, commodities traders. And this happened, it started about 10 years ago with the husband of a colleague of mine who thought I might be helpful to her husband. At one point, I saw as many as 4 oil traders at once. And I would say over the period of these past 10 years, I've seen about a total of 10 traders. Recently, one of them told me that I had come to be known as the shrink to the merc. I think that was an exaggeration, but it speaks to the comfort they feel with me and the acceptance, their willingness to speak about it. To go to see the shrink to the merc is not an embarrassment, or a shameful thing to talk about, but it's something that they openly acknowledge, and they in fact will tease each other. You better go back and see Ken again, they'd say, or it's time for some more help. And that also says obviously something about the culture of the place, and I'll say something more about that as we get into this a little bit more. A good commodities trader can make $1, $2, or even $20 million a year, though many make less. On the other hand, just as they can make a lot of money, they can also lose a lot of money. Sudden shifts in the market can cause the bigger players to lose several $100,000 in an hour. They wake up in the morning, they put on a position, they didn't pay any attention to it, it went against them, and suddenly they're $500,000 in the hole. Several of them I'd seen had gone through dramatic financial reversals, losing millions of dollars, forced to sell their homes or liquidate other assets. They were in debt to the IRA or to the trading houses that stood behind them. Many came to see me, felt out of control, unable to get back into the groove that meant profit and success for them, and many of them were bewildered. How come they were making these mistakes? Why didn't it work anymore? What was I doing? And how could they stop themselves from doing it when they were obviously, doing it badly? Because that's a typical pattern. They'll start losing money, and then they'll lose a lot of money. In a kind of a futile effort to kind of try to reverse the course. What were they doing wrong is basically the question they were asking me. And in the beginning, I felt very severely handicapped because I didn't know anything about trading. And I thought I should try to learn. I didn't even understand the lingo. What's a spread? What is a position, or a dismay, or a butterfly, or a crack, or these? So this is their language. This is the language of their trade, and I didn't understand what that meant at all. And I thought, how could I possibly help them if I don't know what they're talking about? Now I realize I still don't know what they're talking about, but I can help them because it doesn't really matter. Because I'm not there to tell them how to trade. Basically, what I've learned over time. Is I'm there to help preserve their ability to think, and whatever gets in the way of their ability to think, that's where I could be useful to them. And that's about really understanding and attuning to the motivations that are basically driving them. And that's where my training has been helpful. So let me say a little bit something about commodities trading, and maybe it's some other forms of trading as well. The effectiveness of traders, as I've come to understand it, depends on their ability to spot relationships between prices and trends, making snap decisions about the direction in which these trends, these relationships are going. They all have highly intuitive minds for numbers, and they're very adept at making rapid calculations. In fact, I sometimes think it's as if they can see the numbers. It's as if they have a kind of almost an intuitive thing. The way I would have to think it out, there's this trend and there's this trend, and how does it all fit together? For them, it's sort of like it's displayed, some kind of inner monitor. They also pick up clues about the market from events in the larger world. There's a shipping accident, so there's going to be a sudden shortage of oil, in a particular market. Or there's a refinery fire that's going to knock out a supply for a while. Or a new government regulation, or a new tax, or a kind of instability in a foreign place where oil is produced. Or there's a sudden breakthrough in technology, or things like that. Obviously that can affect the supply of oil or the demand for oil. And that's also something that they try to keep in account. They also get significant clues about the direction of the market from other traders in the ring itself, the actual environment that the trading takes place. And I think I should say something about that. The trading takes place in what they call pits. These pits are concentric circles, sort of tiered, layered sort of pits, areas where they actually can stand and see each other, because it's all focused in the center and they're on different levels. They can see what the others are doing. Those who have seats, quote unquote, as to say, they're privileged members of this commodities exchange. They don't actually sit. I think they almost never sit. But if they have a seat, they can be in this pit, and then they can sort of interact with the other traders. The system of trading is called open outcry. They voice their bids in that pit, and they make offers to buy. Okay, if someone says, I've got 10,000 or 100 Beast Maze at 60, and basically what am I bid? And then someone bids, and they sort of make a instantaneous agreement. Then they're in front of each other, in front of everybody, so it's there exposed for everyone to see. They often have gestures that have been somewhat ritualized, so that in a sense, to assist the communication that goes on. So in a sense, it's less ambiguous because it's very noisy. Open outcry is actually extremely, I would say, deafening. Occasionally, I've had I've needed to call a client of mine during while he was in the pit because of something had come up, and I didn't want to respond to a change he needed to make in his appointment or whatever. And the noise was absolutely astonishing. Just you felt like you were in the boiler room of a destroyer. It was just on and on and on. And many of them actually have spoken to me about the fact that they did feel that one of the ill effects of trading was that they were hoarse frequently. They were maybe doing damage, long-term damage to their vocal cords. They had chronic sore throats, that sort of thing. But at the same time, many of them are very physical guys. I mean, they like the movement of it. They like actually being able to engage with each other in that way. The market is essentially driven by two kinds of traders, brokers and locals. Brokers execute orders largely on behalf of those who want to buy or sell futures contracts. They act for outsiders as well as for themselves. Locals traded for themselves, managing their own accounts. They are free to buy or sell on their own judgment, and the reason they're there is that they make markets. That is to say, the locals who are there to kind of make money in the ring make sure that there's a liquidity in the market. There's always somebody there to buy. That's to say, the locals aren't obliged to buy, but their very presence is functionally useful because it makes sure that there are people who are motivated to buy contracts as they become available, and therefore the market keeps on moving. The traders I saw were largely locals, bound by their common interest to keep the market going and to honor their bids. As I said, the trading community itself was a source of information, what happened in the ring. The traders watched each other, generating a kind of common sense about what was going to happen in the market, taking cues from where the pack was headed at any given moment. There were, of course, leaders, big traders, who typically took big risks and often made large sums of money. The smaller traders could learn how the big guys were thinking about market trends, and sometimes they imitated the successful trades that the big guys made. Some of the smaller traders were followed by others if they were seen to be astute or good judges. On the other hand, they couldn't all go in the same direction because then there wasn't any money to be made if everybody was like bidding on the same contracts. Bucking the trend, going with the flow, watching others, aligning with certain big traders, all of this was part of the trading style, essentially, that each trader developed as he learned how to pursue his craft. The communal process, as you could imagine, created tremendous opportunities for manipulations. Big traders acting decisively could influence the market, in effect, bullying their way to profits. Or if the market turned against them, they could endure dramatic losses. That is to say, they would act confident and they're going to buy, and people say, oh, he's buying, this means the market's going to go up, or going to go down, or whatever it's going to go. And so, in a sense, by that kind of behavior, sort of a little bit like bluffing, I suppose, in a poker game, but that kind of behavior, they could somehow get the other traders to move in a direction that ultimately would turn out to be profitable for them. But there was also a black market of information. The locals on the floor could be tipped off about orders that were coming in from outside, coming to brokers on the floor from, quote, upstairs. And having that inside information would give them sort of heads up, so to speak, about where was coming their way, and what there was going to be an opportunity to sell soon, so they'd buy and be in a position to be able to sell when the opportunity came along. This black market of information was, of course, illegal, as you can imagine. There were laws against it. But it was extremely common, and everybody knew that it was part of the system. There was a compliance committee which consisted of traders who were appointed to this, and they were supposed to roam around and notice the things that were going wrong. But most of them thought of it as a kind of a joke. And in fact, they thought that a certain kind of honor prevented you from outing your colleagues unless they did something truly egregiously wrong. There was a lot of grumbling about it, a lot of feeling as if there was cheating that was going on, and so forth. But it was rare that they actually did anything about it. It was sort of like a code of honor among thieves, so to speak. I suspect that given this system, probably at one point or another, every trader has benefited from some form of inside knowledge. Some of them really specialized in inside knowledge. That was there was their niche of the market. That's how they paid the rent. Others disdained it but there was probably nobody who didn't, at some point or another, get some inside knowledge and try to use it. But by and large, it was not where the big money was to be made. A decent living could be eked out with inside information, but the big money was made by, essentially, as far as I came to think of it, really, really astute traders who really picked up where the market was going. Let me say a little bit about the personalities of the men who were attracted to commodities trading. And I say men. I mean, I think I did hear that now and then there was an occasional woman, but it was basically an extremely male culture. The men were physically active, often extremely impulsive, making snap decisions, but living their lives in general that way. They were given to many fast-paced activities, outside the trading floors, like driving sports cars, over all-terrain vehicles, jet skiing. They gambled. A lot of them drank a lot. They used recreational drugs a lot. They went to sporting events and rock concerts, often spending a lot of money on getting very good tickets, ringside seats at the Knicks, things like that. They lived a kind of a life that was full of stimulation and excitement. That's what they craved. I came to think rather quickly that most of the traders had some form of attention deficit disorder. Their minds were sort of like hyperactive. They needed to be related to a world that was fast-moving, that was equal to their minds. Because otherwise they get bored, they get distracted, they couldn't concentrate. But if the market was there and it was like lively and it was happening fast, they could tune into it. So their hyperactive minds were gratified by having an object to focus on that was equal to those active minds. As you can imagine, given this profile, many of them had troubled backgrounds. They had found their way to the floor after unsuccessful efforts at other kinds of careers or other jobs. A fairly high percentage of them had not attended college and had gotten their chance at trading from a family member or a friend who was a trader and hired them originally as clerks or runners, to help them with their own trading business. And then they were sponsored or staked by someone on the floor, given a chance, so to speak. And the ones that were good took advantage of it and made money and profited and went out on their own, and then others didn't. So there was a constant sort of recruitment of people from the margins, as it were, talent that was sort of given the chance to succeed. Many of them hadn't attended college, but on the other hand, there were people who had gone to Princeton and Harvard and other Ivy League universities, or just had decent college educations. It was a very, very mixed bag. And I think that speaks also to the fact that it was a community that valued talent. This was not about status. Where you went to college, what kind of degree you had, mattered nothing in this group. It was how good you were as a trader. It was, in a sense, really sort of democratic in that way. So you could say that the culture was decidedly adolescent, filled with insults, horseplay, vulgar comments, practical jokes, bravado, boasting. In terms of psychological, psychotherapeutic, psychoanalytic terms, you could say the market was pervaded by sibling and Oedipal rivalries, unmetabolized aggression, and narcissistic aggrandizement. But basically, they were adolescents. And they supported themselves in that. I mean, there was no incentive to grow up, because that was the culture of the place. Certain boldness was required, not only to risk the sums that were needed to trade, but to stand up to the barrage of abuse and confrontation. That was a steady diet on the floor. The commodities exchange had strict rules against fighting, because there was so much potential for fighting on the floor, so much aggression, and fighting actually happened. And there was a lot of suspicion and betrayal, so how come you didn't offer that contract to me? Didn't you hear me? I bid on it, that sort of thing. Emotions ran very high. And so, actually they were very good as a community. As soon as someone did get into a fight, and literally a fisticuffs or a shoving match, they'd come in and they'd stop it, because they knew that that was something really quite dangerous. The high degree of emotionality on the trading floor was a problem for the traders. Because as I learned, and this is related to what I said before about my job was to help preserve their capacity to think, they had to be able to change their ideas rapidly as they saw that the market was not going in the direction they thought it was going to go. It was going to go the other way. So they really basically had to realize they were wrong, turn around on the dime, and start trading in the other direction. But the competitive posturing on the floor often made it difficult for the traders to admit their errors of judgment, because they were having to admit that in front of other people. And there was a culture that to some degree supported it, but there was a lot of kind of boasting and a lot of aggrandizing behavior that was that I think ended up trapping them. Many of them became stubborn, competitive with others, and in a sense they were sort of showing off, and in that climate they couldn't so easily change direction. A key problem was that they had entrenched habits of thinking. Whatever made it difficult for them to change their minds in response to changes in the market, which is probably, as I said, having to do with the relationships among each other. But another related problem, in a sense, is if they ever needed to make money, if they were feeling under pressure about making money, if they had a big bill due from the IRS for taxes, back taxes last year, and they wanted to make $200,000 by the end of the month, inevitably that's when they started losing. Because again, that interfered with their ability to respond to the market. If they were wanting the market to make profits for them, to go the way they were predicting it was going to go, because they needed the money, or they didn't maybe even need it, but they were counting on the money, or they wanted the money. They weren't really, again, free to see that the market wasn't going the way they had wanted, that they weren't going to be able to make that money this week, that they were going to have to give that up and adjust, and many of them found themselves not really quite unable to do that. Another problem many of them had is they'd feel they were losing control. They had a strategy for trading that used to work, and then it wasn't working. And so sometimes, in a kind of a stubborn way, and stubbornness was actually a big problem in this group, they just keep on trading with the same sort of set ideas. It's going to turn around, it's got to go up. And that way, they could literally lose millions of dollars by being stubborn, because large sums of money were involved and the market moved so quickly. So if they weren't able to admit that they were wrong, they could really dig themselves a huge pit, a huge hole. Sometimes the traders, they had a slogan among themselves that to help remind themselves about this danger. They'd say, "It's not the money, it's the trade." And by that they meant you have to keep your mind on this individual trade, the specific opportunity to pull off this trade. If you're thinking about the money, you know, you're going to get into trouble because there's no guarantee about the money. It's your nimbleness, it's your flexibility in trading. You have to keep your eye on the market. Don't think so much about the profit. On the other hand, there was another slogan they had that they frequently resorted to, and this is how they help each other. They would give this is sort of homespun advice about trader to trader. It's all about the money. And I think that was sometimes because the excitement of trading was sort of like gambling. And they kind of get carried away with the gambling aspect of it, the game of it, and caught up in the heady atmosphere of gambling, they forget that it was all about the money. I mean, basically, the money they made was what lent stability to their lives. It paid the rent, it paid the children's tuition bills, their alimony. Of course, many of them were divorced. So it could seem all too easily like an exciting game, a recreation, not really a job, not a serious way to kind of support oneself. So they had these various slogans which were designed to kind of like help pull themselves back from these places that they would get into, which impaired their ability to be more flexible. So, as I said, what I came to see pretty quickly was that my role was to help protect their capacity to think, to be flexible, to be open to the new information, to change their minds, not to get stubborn, not to get caught into a competition, not to set goals for themselves that really would make it impossible to adapt. Also, their minds could get fuzzy or inattentive for other reasons as well. It was not unusual for bravado to lead them to trade when they were suffering from severe hangovers or sleep deprivation. You know, they'd come in on 3 hours of sleep, having drunk themselves into a stupor the night before, and think. They could think because that's what they do. And so often, a lot of the time, I would have to inquire into how much sleep did you get? How much did you drink last night? Because clearly, as you can well imagine, if they really had these lack of sleep and they had these hangovers, their minds were not as quick as they needed to be. But mostly, it was probing into the other sorts of motivations. They made a big error in the market. I would ask, so was a deadline for a payment, a large payment to the IRS looming? Was that what was in your mind? When you got into that place? Had they been competing with somebody else on the floor? Had they were they trying to show off how much they could score? Had they set themselves a goal? I want to make $1 million by the end of the month, or something like that. Was that what really spoiled their flexibility and judgment? In effect, I was attempting, in my role with them, to add a new level of self-reflection to the process. They couldn't do that. They couldn't stand back and say, well, why am I acting this way? What's going on with me? But I could do that with them. And I think they came to really value that after a while. They didn't know what was going on, but so standing back from the experience, they could sort of see, oh, yeah. That's what was going on with me, and that's why I did that stupid trade that I really regret. And after a while of working with them and seeing with individual traders what were the danger points for them, the things they were particularly susceptible to, I could start to anticipate. As a payment to the IRS was coming up, I could say, okay, look, we're going to enter into a tricky period right now, and you're going to have to be kind of careful about not trying to make the market do what you want it to do. Sometimes it looked to them as if they had just gotten overexcited, they had gotten mindless, but almost always, when we looked into it more carefully, we could find something, some motivation that was leading the trader to get into trouble. I want to talk now about a particular trader, because this is a case where I did all of these things. I'll call him Victor. And I think I helped him. He liked meeting with me. He was a very intelligent man. He had actually gone to the University of Pennsylvania. And he found it very useful. He found himself interested and sucked into talking with me about this. But then what we found is that even when we could identify the danger points, that often didn't stop him from torpedoing his success. So gradually I became convinced that something deeper was at stake, some other deeper problem with his motivation. So a little bit about Victor's background. He had grown up in a contentious relationship with his parents, whom he viewed as pretentious and formal. His father was a professor at a prestigious Ivy League university, while his mother seemed unduly preoccupied with her status as the wife of a tenured faculty member. The key event in his childhood was the family's move from a somewhat ramshackle neighborhood with a population of generally low socioeconomic status, a place his family could afford at the beginning of his father's academic career before he was tenured. They moved to a more affluent neighborhood that they felt was more suitable to an established member of the faculty. But that move, which took place, I think, when Victor was something like 12 or 13, separated Victor from the many friends with whom he had played sports and hung out with, many of whom were black and working class. After the move, he went back frequently to his old neighborhood to be with his friends, to play sports with them, and so on and so forth. But the move marked a dramatic shift in his relationship with his family. Henceforth, he much more actively tried to separate himself from what he took to be his parents' pretentiousness and detachment from real life. Now, the move had really, he could tolerate it as long as he was able to go out and play, but once parents had made the move, it had gotten to him more fully. So he objected also to their lack of interest in who he really was and what he really valued. Basically, his interest in school and things like that suffered. He did go on to college, but in the first semester, he dropped out. He got involved with drink and alcohol. He got involved with a woman who was a barmaid, and school was left behind. I think obviously there was an element of rebellion against his father as a tenured professor, but I think also Victor was sort of quite lost. He had been taken away from this environment with his friends that he valued and enjoyed, and maybe he was trying to recreate that in some way. So as I think it, Victor developed the identity of a rebel in reaction to his parents' values, and also something of a daredevil who lived on the edge, courting danger in ways that appeared to him his parents never did. Eventually, he sort of smoothed things out. He got back into college. He graduated. He moved to New York. He tried several things. He did eventually got a job at the Mercantile Exchange. The job appealed to him in part because it was a place, as I said, of unpretentious, self-made men, crudely and openly competitive, who basically valued talent, and completely without the pretentiousness that he so despised in his parents. It also provided him with a lot of opportunities to court danger on a daily basis. He was very successful. In a short amount of time, he made a great deal of money. He married a beautiful European-born wife. He had 3 children. He bought and moved into a lavish apartment on Fifth Avenue. And although he felt obviously some discomfort with the trappings of his success, he was a self-made man. On the other hand, feeling that he didn't somehow really belong there, he'd invite his fellow traders over to drink beer with him on the terrace of his new apartment, and they tossed the beer cans up over the edge of the terrace wall to the neighbors down below, making fun of his establishment neighbors. He wasn't completely comfortable with this new life that his self-made status had brought to him. The mix of money, European culture, crude competition, and family didn't harmonize. To the point where I came to think, as I spoke with Victor more and more about this history, this had happened before I started working with him, it seemed as if Victor was compelled to sabotage his success. He was living a life he didn't want, a life that felt stifling and false. So a series of big losses in the market forced him to sell the apartment. Continuing losses forced him to scramble with debt and unpaid taxes. He was in deep trouble. But he had managed to cancel what had been, in effect, a repetition of his childhood move away from the old working class neighborhood. I don't think he knew he was doing that, but he was desperately, in a sense, getting himself out of a situation that felt painfully uncomfortable to him, not him. His losses restored excitement to his life, providing him with a temporary focus on survival, but it didn't suggest an alternative way to live, a new set of goals, a new definition of what a successful life might be. So it took some time in my work with him for this all to be kind of clarified, and more time for some answers to emerge. Once we saw that Victor was really, at critical moments, sabotaging his success, because basically he feared what his success would inevitably lead to, we were able to start thinking about modifying these self-destructive behaviors, his understanding of his capacity to be distracted, impulsive. He got sort of an overview of himself that was helpful. He separated from his wife, and he began to think, with my help, about what kind of life did he actually want to lead. So if he made money, if he was successful, if he didn't have to keep sabotaging himself, what would he spend it on? What would he do with it? What would feel authentic to him? So it then gradually came to seem as if his life could coalesce around more appropriate goals that he could accept. He still continued to be impulsive. He was the same kind of guy. He liked excitement. He did like danger, but he was growing up. He wanted to make sure that he could make enough money to give some to his children to enable them to lead a more privileged sort of life, and so forth. So his various sort of motivations gradually pointed the way, to a new course of action. So this is a clear example, I think, of what would normally not be included in coaching. It sort of came out of coaching, but it went sort of deeper. And I think it's because the motivations and the explanations that we were searching for simply led us deeper. They weren't sufficient to account for, in this case, they weren't sufficient to account for Victor's behavior. My sessions with him usually began with his reporting on his trades for the week. I made money this week. I lost money. Tuesday was really bad. I lost $50,000. Well, how did you lose $50,000? What was going on? And he got better and better at sort of recognizing, in a sense, what his motivations were. He still drank too much. He'd go in and trade when he was having a hangover. But gradually, all that work kind of gradually led to trying to think about, as I said, what kind of life did he really want to lead? I think it's worth saying that he obviously was a good enough trader so he could lose all this money and still land on his feet. He could court danger successfully, but not without really destroying his life. And he was one of those traders on the floor I came to see who was admired by his colleagues. I mean, the other traders thought of him as, he was a smart guy. They knew that he was sort of flaky, that he could really go off the deep end and get into trouble, but that basically they respected him. Okay, now I want to talk about shifting something. I'll shift a little bit. The title of this talk is not only what makes traders trade, but how it's changing in the digital age. So the whole commodities trading enterprise is being radically shifted. The trading now goes on round the clock, 24 hours a day. It goes on online. You don't have to be at the commodities exchange. You don't need the pits anymore. Gradually, open outcry, which was the technique of trading I referred to before, is being replaced by computer keyboards and screens. There's no longer even a reason why a trader has to go to the Merc to trade. And many of them have actually stopped. They stay at home. This is difficult and disruptive to the traders who relied a lot on the information that they picked up on the floor, what the other traders were doing. The impersonal nature of computerized trades makes it less possible to see the big traders that are working, or to identify the savvy small traders and take cues from what they're doing. There's no din, there's no bustle, no cues apart from the screen. Less and less are traders able to communicate with each other, unable to learn about or to manipulate the course of trading. Inside information is no longer available through the usual channels, although I think there's a lot of legitimate concern that it's available, more of it is available through other sorts of channels. Some of the traders are taking a middle course here, they're not leaving the course, but they're taking their computers to the floor. So they actually enter their trades on the computer and pick up information while they're doing that. They kind of follow the market in that way as well. But the trend is unmistakable, and it's now generally acknowledged. It's just a matter of time before the pits will be shut down completely, and all the trading will go on online. Interestingly, this shift has been immensely beneficial to Victor. Highly influenced by the competitive atmosphere of the floor, all too easily pulled into the teasing and posturing of his peers, locked into stubborn positions as a result of that, it's as if all the distractions have been edited out of the process. The impersonal quiet of the computer screen has allowed him to listen to his mind more clearly and to trade more effectively. To be sure, he feels a little deprived of his contact with others because there was a certain amount of fun in that, but it's more than offset by his increased effectiveness in making money. As you can imagine, this has also placed in sharper relief the underlying dynamic factors that affect his trading. When he screws up now, it's much more obvious why he's screwing up. But other traders are having a much harder time with the anonymity and silence of this shift. They have to rethink their trading styles radically, and in most cases they settle for reduced profits. The Mercantile Exchange's public offering a few years ago, they sold shares. I mean, they made it into another business. And those who had seats were the shareholders, basically, and when it went public, they had a windfall profit. I think it was something like $11 million per seat. And, a nice little tidy nest egg. So those who had those seats had that, they could take that money and essentially retire or reduce the level of their activity. But the smaller traders who leased their seats from larger companies to participate in the MERC, but they're essentially left out. It's a very sobering time. You could say that the digitized and computerized trading continues and amplifies a long historical process of rationalization and dematerialization of all forms of commerce. Commodities traders are further and further away from the actual stuff they're responsible for moving around the world. Right? And in the old days in the markets, in the souks, things were piled up, or there were barrels here, or piles of timber, or whatever it was that people were sort of selling, and there'd be kind of like haggling that was going on. But more and more, these guys never see oil, they never see the stuff itself. All they deal with, what they're trading back and forth are kind of futures contracts. And so, going from the pits to the computer just is another further extension of that process of dematerialization. It's all become abstracted. The workings of Adam Smith's invisible hand in the market are getting harder and harder to detect. So there are some consequences. I want to end by talking about how that's changing things. Cheating and manipulation are increasingly hidden. On the floor of the MERC, the traders had a pretty good idea of what was going on in the shadows and who was doing it. They also had a good idea of how much profit was to be gained through undercover trading, as the lives that they were leading looked relatively open to each other. The trades that disappeared from the floor could be roughly gauged, and the money that the traders siphoned off the floor was reflected in their lifestyle. If a trader bought a new Ferrari, for example, it had to come from somewhere. So they knew, there were signals, there was information that helped them kind of keep track about what was going on under the surface. So the cheaters were known. The cheating was some degree contained by the public nature of the information about the lives they led. But now that the traders are invisible to each other, the hidden deals are harder to detect and their scope harder to measure. Frankly, I have no way of knowing how much goes on behind the scenes. But the traders believe a great deal is. upstairs more and more, in a sense, is engaging in kind of manipulative, hidden manipulations of the market. They are, of course, prone to paranoia, but I think their concern is legitimate. Compliance on the floor has always been largely ineffective, as I said, often considered a joke. But today I think there's a serious question: is it even possible? The second consequence of the change is that the opportunities for social advancement that existed for talented traders are now significantly curtailed. People aren't coming in from the sidelines as runners or as clerks. The informal and rough community no longer recruits these people to do their menial work, certainly not in the numbers they did before, providing chances for outsiders to observe and to learn the trade. The web of personal relationships that offered stakes to people and extended helping hands to eager and gifted newcomers is fast falling apart. And there's a third and final point that concerns me about this. What we're seeing, I think, in the collapse of open outcry is the continuing rise of a new class of financial experts in society. The role of investor capitalism in our society drives an intensified, relentless search for new sources of profit and greater profitability. I wrote this paper about 6 months ago. I think we've seen very much how that relentless drive has driven people to do really, what in retrospect seem like really, really dangerous and stupid things. But the commodities trade, commodities exchanges, commodities trading is a significant part of this development. Now, hedge fund managers, investment firms, banks, and others are increasingly turning to commodities as investments. The rise of digitized, round-the-clock trading amplifies the opportunities for profits, while the development of more and more sophisticated computer programs to track and analyze trends and respond rapidly to market development increasingly takes the risk of personal judgment out of trading. As I said, these guys had a kind of an intuitive feeling for how the market was going. But I think increasingly more and more sophisticated, high-powered computer programs are making similar kinds of judgments and making it less necessary to rely on that kind of intuitive judgments that traders used to make. Many traders have commented to me in the past years how the market has become extraordinarily more volatile now, given to sudden, huge, and unpredictable shifts. This is due, in part, they believe, to the fact that bigger players, trading electronically, are playing a greater role and having a greater influence on the market. This places a greater premium on the trader's ability to be mentally nimble. But it also means that trading will become more and more specialized, open only to those who have the training, the skills, the sophisticated education, and tools to grasp the nature of this new globalized market. The messy and noisy transactions in the pits are increasingly out of place. Some of the extraordinary fluctuations in the price of oil, food, metals, and other commodities can be traced, of course, to these trends. But I suspect as well that increasingly profit is being skimmed off the top by more and more sophisticated traders who are working upstairs, behind the scenes, armed with computers and new sophisticated sources of data to serve investors. It's sobering to me to recognize that this further marginalizes our interest in and commitment to other social agendas. This is before the recent election, right? answers to our problems that do not involve greater profitability for somebody, somehow, somewhere, someplace, typically up until now have not been getting attention. The market increasingly seems to be our answer to anything, to everything. But another sobering thought for us is that the increased rationalization and invisibility of the commodities market is also rendering the role of the unconscious more difficult to detect. In the pits, the spectrum of human motivation was there to see. The vanity, the competitiveness, the rivalries, the fears, the jokes, the collisions, the bonds that animated the spectacle of trade, they were all there to be seen. The hidden motives, as a result, were not too difficult to detect as well. Far from buried, they were an integral part of open outcry. So how will we be able to detect the unconscious in their absence? That's my paper. So, any thoughts, comments, questions? Do we need to take a bathroom break?
Nope.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on fantasy. First is how suitable the term pit is for an organization that runs that way. It is a pit, and it's obviously not intentionally by anyone, but it clearly was as if it were designed to get the worst on people without suitable controls or without significant contribution of the better part of human nature. So the name was very appropriate. But my fantasy is in relation to you trader patient that you were trying to help, because you talk about his wanting to sabotage himself, which may be certainly true. The question is, why was he trying to sabotage himself? Because he was punishing himself. And my fantasy, being a great believer that most of the human conflicts are due to unresolved physical conflicts, is that's where it is coming from. From the little that you said, this was my fantasy. The father did very well from going from a poor neighborhood and lower class into an intellectual tenured professor in a university, which imply a variety of different things, certainly talent academically and so on. And you mentioned too that the wife, the mother of this particular patient of yours, was very interested in her position as a wife of a tenured professor in the university and so on. And that's where I think the problem was, that this boy had an unresolved Oedipus conflict and couldn't make it academically. You gave some of the reasons, and they may well be true. There is the possibility, as you mentioned, that many of these people have an attention deficit disorder. They are hyperactive and very, very impulsive, and that may have, because this is the history that you described, that you rightly said, is pretty common in people that have an attention deficit disorder. They are very impulsive, and they are hyper attentive, so a place like the pit is wonderful for them. It's like being in a jungle. You have to be paying attention to all kinds of things very quickly. And if you are bright, you can do very well. Unfortunately, as you say, because the worst of human nature is expressed in stable rivalry and aggression and so on, finds an incredible milieu to get a free expression, then much of that gets spoiled by this, a contamination from the worst part of nature. But my fantasy is that he failed academically. And what he was saying, essentially, with his joining this pit and being successful as he was, to his mother is, why do you admire father more than me? Look, I have a lot of money and I moved to the Fifth Avenue. I'm a multi-millionaire. Why don't you love me more than you love me? You know, and the guilt associated with this conflict is what made him punish himself and sabotage himself and ruin his success, because it was too conflictual. Being successful was like killing the father, really, essentially. And obviously, you know, being a reasonable human being in other sense, that's not acceptable to one superego. So that was my fantasy. Whether it is true or not, I don't know. But I find it attractive because I think most of these things go down to the Oedipus complex, and from the few things that you pointed out to, it seems to me that there is some evidence there to suspect that there was a lot in that area, you know.
Right.
So that's interesting.
But it's an interesting speculation. Of course, all of this had happened before I started working with him, even,
Yes.
you know, the collapse, the loss of the apartment and all of that. So, and seeing him the way I was with the focus on his trading, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to go in and sort of explore that sort of in a deeper way. So we'll never know,
Yeah, sure.
so to speak, about to what part that may have played in his motivation. But it's an interesting thought. But I did want to pick up on what you said at first. You could say, I think, with some justice, that the pits, you know, represent the worst of us all. And you could even argue that society as a whole delegates to certain people who are unsuitable for other more refined careers the job of going into the pits and doing the dirty work, in a sense, that is necessary to make it happen. And I think there's something about that as well. But what I didn't say in the paper is that I actually got to like these guys a lot. I like, they're very decent guys, and when you make a connection with them, when you understand them and you help them, something really blossoms in my relationship with them. That was very gratifying and enjoyable. So I didn't, even though, you know, they lived a lifestyle that would have been impossible for me. the things that they enjoy doing just I would not enjoy doing that. In fact, most of them would scare me. You know, diving out of airplanes, you know, or jet skiing, or all that sort of stuff. But there was something about them that was endearing. And I think another factor was, as a child, I was kind of bookish. You know, I was shy, sort of retiring. Rather than go out and play on the playing field or on the streets, you know, of New York, I retired to my room and go to the library and read and so on and so forth. So I always felt somewhat scared and intimidated by these were the guys who were the bullies out on the street, right? The hyperactive kids, the aggressive ones, the ones always getting into trouble, fighting, doing things like that. So I established in my later life a new relationship to the bullies of my youth. It was a kind of a reconciliation. That was just a personal dimension to this whole story, which was meaningful to me, and something that I was glad that I had a chance to experience.
Actually, I run the ADHD clinic for the university here, and see literally thousands of these patients through the years. And a large number of them are extraordinarily bright and likable and decent, and suffer tremendously. And this man, if my fantasy was correct, my speculation, as you call it, showed that in his behavior by having to punish himself for having these negative thoughts. The other thought that I had is that I'm so grateful that the stock market is so different from the commodities market, you know, because it has taken some of the sting of the pit out of it, as is happening now with, you know, with the digital era. though as you say, of course, has all the dangers. We are very good at finding a way of breaking the norms and the law and being a social and the rest of it. But because such a thing, of course, would have been catastrophic. It just wouldn't have been viable, really. So it's quite a relief to know that the stock market doesn't function quite that way. Though there is a lot of hanky-panky, yes, there is. The other thing is what we were talking earlier, that I show you that paper's bills, where some economists and a lot of other people are using Darwinian natural selection theory to understand better and explain these things. And of course, there was nothing in the pit that will promote generosity or altruism or constructive cooperation between the group, because the main motivation is greed, make money, you know. And it may not be because of the money, it may be because then you are a big fish in that pool, you know, in that tank. You are the fellow that is the brightest, or makes a better trades or whatever it may be that is behind the money itself. Because money is, in a way, a symbol for many other things, you know. It's a bigger penis, it's God knows what it is in the conscience of these people, you know. So, yet in the stock market is different, because I have seen occasions for many years, and I'll give you some examples of it, where altruism or the thought of the welfare of other people, balancing your own interest to make profits in the market or achieve some degree of comfort in your old age or whatever it is that your aims are. And I remember, for example, you will all remember, when South Africa, you know, there was a time that, what is it that they have? It's either diamond mines or gold mines or something like that.
Diamond.
And many places, many organizations, particularly universities, withdrew their funds from there because of the abuse, you know. And
They wouldn't buy Kudu-runs either.
yeah, that's correct. You see, which shows that tendency that, yeah, we are greedy and we are egotistic and we, you know, think about ourselves first and foremost, but at the same time we do have the capacity to be generous and to think of others and to be empathic and to think what is in the best interest of everybody rather than in your own best interest all the time. Because in reality, as we discuss here frequently, what is in the best interest of everybody is in your best interest. And much more so than what is in your best interest and damage everybody else being really in your best interest. That's really the case. So in the market you could see that. The condition exists where that could happen, but in the pit that would be impossible. Because it was just, it was designed for the worst in human nature.
Primitive,
Yeah.
But I enjoy your lecture. That was very, I didn't know anything about commodities market. It's always that I always heard that one should avoid.
Well, the thing about commodities, I mean, you could choose not to buy stocks. You know, you could put your money in the mattress. You could buy bonds. You know, you could buy real estate. You could do other things with your money. The thing, though, about commodities, you need the commodities. The oil, these people make money whether the market goes up or the market goes down, because we all need these supplies all the time. So that lends another dimension to it. We can't choose not to buy oil, because as long as our cars require gasoline, it's absolutely essential. Or corn or wheat, or all of those sorts of things. So in a certain sense, it's a different, you know, it's a different response to the needs of society. But perhaps there are others who have questions or thoughts.
I wonder if there's a relationship between what you just said and the distinction that Dr. Nahara just made. That one is essential and the other is not. And the non-essential allows for a more affiliative response than the essential.
Well, the consumer of stocks, you put it that way,
Right.
does have more choices, right? And I think what you were saying about the investment policies in South African stocks and diamonds and so forth, really was driven not by the financial industry so much as the consumer. You know, the people who were buying stocks, managing the portfolios of the universities or investments and so on and so forth. So it was public opinion had more weight in those circumstances. My experience is that people who work in the financial industry, and of course I live in New York, I work in New York, a lot of the people I see are in the financial industry. They're not very nice people. You know, they're very aggressive, they're very, they all have their favorite charities. But many of the charities are basically another form of self-promotion because they're competing with each other about being on the board of this or having this building named after them as opposed to somebody else. So it's not a world of sweetness and light. Anyway, but
You know, another interesting question occurred to me. You presented that helping the trader, Victor, become more aware of these various factors at work improved his performance.
Mhm.
And I'm not questioning that. What it made me think of was artists have often been afraid that understanding too much would impede their creativity.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's proper, but this is a creative activity, this pit trading.
right,
And so it's interesting, the balance.
right. No, I'm with you on that too. I mean, I think everybody is helped by being able to be more reflective about what they do. Yeah.
I'm reading Witness, the book by Whittaker Chambers about the Alger Hiss trial that he, and it's interesting, he's talking about his experience in the underworld and how many children of very wealthy families were drawn to the Communist Party in the United States. And I don't know exactly whether it was related to the conflicts around power, but it's interesting. I was wondering what thoughts you had about that.
Well, I'm sure that Dr. Nahara would sort of see that as part of the Oedipal story. This is a way to get back at the father, to kind of, sort of stick it to him by saying, I oppose everything that you've done, everything you stand for, all your beliefs, and you're helped by the fact that there's a cadre of other people who think similarly, right? So in a sense it becomes it's reinforced, it becomes sort of more thinkable. But I think, back then it did seem as if there was an alternative to market type thinking. The whole notion of a planned economy, of socialism and government, it's as if those ideas in a sense have been driven out. During the course of the Cold War, we were sort of opposed to each other, then we won. The Soviet bloc lost. The Soviet Union fell apart. It's as if all alternative ideas to the marketplace were discredited. So who else would you join up? If you wanted to fight your father, who was the president of a large corporation, who else would you join up with? You'd have to do it in a more individual, more private sort of a way.
I was thinking about the impact on the country by the irresponsible use of trading as a kind of ambivalent relationship to one's own country. A lot of damage gets done.
Right.
One's family, in a sense.
Right.